I am unashamed. What about you?
So welcome back to Unashamed. And we've talked about this before. We record a couple of podcasts in one setting. So to the listener, you're listening, there's a day maybe in between. But we're doing it right here one after the other. And so we just had Joe Beam on our podcast talking about spiritual warfare and specifically the story in Luke chapter 8 about the demoniac that Jesus cast all the demons out of. And all I can say is, wow, my mind is still, I'm somewhere in between reeling and, man, there was just so much more I wanted to talk about. We couldn't deal with it all.
Well, really, after we finished that, I was just talking to him off air and was like, look, I really believe God chose you to be a lightning rod for all our questions on this. And he seemed humble, and because a lot of, these issues that you come across, there's really no answers definite, and because it's just what people theorize. And all you got to do is go read what all the scholars say about Luke 8, this whole section, and you're not going to find agreement on all the issues, which is why I wore this shirt today. I was like, my wife's coming home, and we're going to talk about demon possession. So I need to break out the I could be wrong shirt.
And Phil has added on the back, but I doubt it.
No, but I mean, it was hard to limit the questions to him to a handful of questions because there's a lot, even in this section. He mainly gave an overview. And so a couple of questions I asked him was, one, in the middle of Luke 8, and just to kind of review what we read, I mean, Jesus is going along explaining the kingdom of God, and multiple times it says he's driving out evil spirits and casting out demons, and even in the next couple chapters, he's going to give that ability to, his apostles, and they come in, and they were the euphoria over having that ability. In Luke 10, it caused excitement.
Yeah.
And they're like, Lord, even the demons submit to us. That's in 10:17 of Luke. And then Jesus gives this famous reply like, well, look, he replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I've given you authority to trample over poisonous snakes and to overcome the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven.
Yep.
And so I really found that fascinating that he has all this knowledge on this, but the bottom line is, Luke is doing this investigation and revealing this to reveal who has the power over this. And in the overtime, I made that illustration that Jesus, just a couple years later from this, becomes this man if you walk by.
Yeah.
They stripped him naked, they tortured him, they bound him, and they crucified him on a cross, and he was led to the tombs. And Jesus did that as the ultimate victory and triumph over evil.
Yep.
And so here he's showing that he has this power, because it was very comforting to me that when he said go, and you can read all three accounts of the demon-possessed guy in the tombs. In Matthew's, there's two guys. But you just realize who has the power here. Jesus is the only person that's ever been on the planet in any manuscript that didn't have to appeal to a higher power. And we're all familiar with exorcisms, and whether you believe this is going on or not, everyone else is having to go get a power to assist them to exorcise a demon. But right. Jesus said, go. Kind of like he did with the storm. Peace. And it... Mm-hmm. So this leads for us to not miss the point that Jesus is the Son of God. He is who he said he is.
Yeah. And Joe makes a point about the name of Jesus when he's talking about how we deal with these interactions, which are rare, I think, when it comes to demon possession. But he told the story that I've told before from Acts 19 about these Jewish exorcists, the sons of Sceva, that had tried to invoke the name of Jesus, but the demons were a little too wily for that. And they said, well, we've heard of Jesus and we've heard of Paul, but we never heard of you. And then they didn't, not only did they not leave the person, but they didn't beat the fire out of them when they all ran out naked and bleeding. So he was making the point.
It's showing time after time what the Hebrew writer said, he too shared in their humanity. To Jase's point, we went through all that misery so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death.
Right.
You know, it's life and death hanging on Jesus showing up to battle these demons.
Right.
Yeah.
Start there.
Right.
And I had a couple other theories that I wanted to talk about. I mean, I do have my I could be wrong shirt on, but I think one thing that when I was studying this that Jesus was showing is that even John the Baptist in the previous chapter and his family, they were struggling with the narrative of who Jesus is, the king, and the kind of kingdom he was bringing. You know, when he was talking about blessed are you when you're weak and poor, and everyone, I think, from a Jewish perspective, they were looking for the king to crush the other kingdoms.
Yep.
When are we taking on Rome? And, well, if you look at the details of this story, he goes kind of outside the Jewish realm here in this, because we have a bunch of pigs. Well,
that tells you right there they're not in Jewish territory.
Either they're not, or, you know, when I read all these scholars, or someone is selling these pigs to the Gentiles, right, or which would technically be not kosher with the law.
Right.
But I mean, who has 2,000 pigs over there? I was over there. You know, I didn't see a pig anywhere because it was considered an unclean animal, and some of them to this day wouldn't eat a pork chop, right, or even have a pig. So, and my point is that instead of, you know, him going out the region and killing a Roman as a sign that he's fixed to overthrow that regime, I think Jesus does something. That's the last thing that you're expecting, is he redeems a Gentile in front of them. And so I think what I'm getting at is we got to be careful. A lot of times people throw evil around into groups of people, where Jesus is bringing up this idea that everybody went into controversy about, that there are spiritual forces of evil out there.
Yep.
And you know, with us, all we can do is love the person and hate the evil, but you can never just take whole groups of people and all of a sudden cast them off as evil and we need to go kill them. And, you know, our weapon, the best weapon we have, and you can reference that passage in Corinthians where he said the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. And I realize that wars happen, you know, to end oppression, and I'm not really saying that. I'm just saying the best weapon we have is this guy who has the power to fix this guy. Because if you saw this guy and you believe this story is true, and has supernatural strength, superhuman strength, because of these demons, and no one can bind him and control him, and Jesus, in essence, transforms him into a normal being by having this happen. Well, Jesus is the greatest weapon ever.
Right.
He can change the worst of the worst, the evil of the evil. And so I said all that to say I think their picture of Jesus was, Rome is oppressing us. Let's destroy all the Roman, you know, soldiers. Because he had just had this other instance with the centurion just a couple chapters back. He's trying to send them a message that what you think I'm going to do is not what I'm going to do.
And I don't know this because the text doesn't tell us, but I've always assumed, and I'm just guessing because, again, it doesn't tell me specifically, that this guy that the demons came out of I've always thought he was a Gentile because Jesus didn't take him along with him, but he told him, no, you stay and you tell people what God did in your life. And I've always thought, why would he do that? I mean, most of the other people in this point, whenever something happens, they kind of follow the entourage, and that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to go with Jesus. Mm-hmm. There was a reason why he left him there to talk to people. And, the Gentiles aren't going to come in fully until way down to Cornelius in Acts 10. There's going to be years, 20 to 30 years after the gospel is preached in Acts 2. And so I've always thought, I think Jesus left him there as a great testimony for what had happened that day. I mean, everybody knows this guy. Who hasn't been afraid? But they were more afraid in the story, Jason. We didn't get into this with Joe. I would love to hear what he had to say. Why were they so afraid? If there was anybody to be afraid of, it was this crazy demoniac with over 2,000 demons in him. They were more afraid when the demons were cast out. Because it says they came and they heard what happened and they were afraid.
Well, because they were in the presence of God. It goes back to what we were talking about in the last podcast. And don't get
they asked Jesus to leave.
Yeah, and don't get the wrong idea about, groups of people do rise up and do atrocities. We all know what happened, with Hitler and the Germans and they're murdering millions of people, the Jews that we're even talking about. But a lot of people dropped their atheistic views when that happened because they deemed that people could not be that evil without some kind of evil forces in there. And I agree with that.
Yeah.
When you start thinking about how evil shows itself, and even you look in the world today, even you see it on the streets where people just have random acts of violence and all.
Yep.
I mean, don't close your mind to the presence of evil. And I love what Dr. Joe said in the overtime about, we respect it. We're not looking at it as a clown or something we're just laughing about and we're going to dress up, and
he talks about it more extensively in the book. That's the red suit and the forked tail and the pitchfork, and that's all the sort of commercialization and like almost clown-like.
Yeah, and he brought up that spiritual song about, we're rolling the gospel chariot along.
We talked about that before.
Yeah, well, I've always hated that, and you run right over the devil, and it just makes it, when you look at real life and the lying and the murdering and the altar of the thinking and the futility that we read in Ephesians 4, look, we're in a spiritual war.
Yeah.
And you read these stories like this, and I know it's hard to learn and understand all the details, and if the Lord wanted us to know exactly what was going to transpire and how this all works, he would have laid it out there for us. But there's no doubt that there is an evil presence, and there's no doubt that Jesus is victorious and has the authority over it. I mean, that is us as human beings, our best weapon.
Right.
So we respect that, and we take comfort in it.
So a couple of things before we go to break. One is, I'll mention the book again, Seeing the Unseen, Joe Beam. It's a fantastic, it's a detailed study, but it's not written at a level that you can't grab it. But he does do a really good job with all of spiritual warfare, and including the story that we've been talking about in Luke chapter 8 is in there. And also marriagehelper.com is where you go for the marriage work they're doing, which is incredible. And we talked about that on the last podcast. I think one of the reasons why, and we talked about this with Joe, that his stuff is so good, he hasn't written a lot of books, but the ones he's written are very, very good and very, very personal. And I think that's part of his success is because of his own life and his own overcoming and what happened to him. And he goes into that in his books, which I think is powerful. In that vein, so we got a guest on today, another guest, on our podcast. And I think practicality and story go along with this guy perfectly well. And a lot of you have been asking me, because I've gotten several emails over the last year, when are you going to have Burly on? Because we talk about Burly quite a bit on the podcast. He's one of our entourage that's here. But other than, I think, one picture of him going in front of a deer cam where he looked like Sasquatch out in the woods, we've never seen Burly. So we're going to actually get a look and a conversation with Burly, because I think in this vein and context of talking about spiritual warfare, his story and how he came to Christ is pretty amazing. and continuing what he does as well. So we're going to take a break. We come back on the other side of the break. We're going to let Unashamed Nation meet Burly and hear his story. So one of our sponsors, Barrel Buddy, we love what these guys do. They're a Christian company. They're a small business. And Jase, they're a lot like us. They saw a need while they were hunting and came up with a product that you have there in front of you.
Yeah, it was quite clever because, most of the time when you're cleaning your gun, it's not something that you look forward to. So they're like, well, let's give everybody a buddy to help them do this. Who doesn't like a buddy, Al?
When it comes to hunting, who doesn't need a buddy? And they thought of it the right way. The Barrel Buddy. The old days, when I used to clean my barrels out, I do it with the patches. The problem is they don't really make the full contact with the bore of your gun. They're hard to pick up and deal with. Same thing with the bore snake. I mean, it wouldn't hardly go through my gun. So they've come up with a great process in these polymers. They go through your barrel. They pick up everything that's on there. Your gun is clean. All you got to do is look at it. You don't have to wonder about it. So check these guys out. They got a great product. They're a great company, great guys, and do a really good job. BarrelBuddy.com is where you go. BARREL Buddy. BarrelBuddy.com. Check them out. So welcome back to Unashamed. Burly, welcome to the lair.
Good to be here.
This is actually your old bedroom.
It is. Y'all ran me out.
You were the
here.
only one that lived here for like a hunting season over several seasons. So you actually lived in this space.
I kind of homesteaded this place, and I got run out.
We ran him out so we could build a podcast studio.
Or as Phil's always said, Burly.
When Burly comes.
There's a lot of funny stories involving you, which I'm not sure why that is. And look, I'll give you some breaking news here. Burly actually used to be my boss.
I did.
You remember that?
And Willie.
And Willie.
I hadn't heard that. What?
Oh, I worked for Burly. I was
Where?
here in town. I mean, back when we had no money, and I was trying to find myself and figure out what I was gonna do. I'm not sure really how we got hooked up.
Well, we were roofing.
Yeah, that's what we were
after
doing.
the big hailstorm.
Okay.
I just obeyed the gospel.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Running around with Kurt Ryder. I had a roofing business going on.
Because you were a construction guy, you're a carpenter. I mean, Burly can do anything. The thing about Burly is the man is a jack of all trades. I mean, you could always build stuff and do stuff. None of us can ever
Well,
do
the
it.
reason you're here now, because you moved to Colorado. How long ago did you move to Colorado?
18 years ago.
Well, it seemed like you never left, because you
Well,
really didn't.
I didn't. I just come back every year and go duck hunting.
So Burly we have this weird relationship.
I'm the guest that never left.
Yeah.
That explains most of the children in our
So
family.
he was raised here. You were brought to the Lord, which we'll get into that later. So you move away because you found, your wife is spectacular. We love Miss Rose.
A rose among thorns.
She is.
She is my dream woman.
She's amazing, and it testifies to the evidence of God that she said yes. So
She was young.
I could say the same about you.
well, people do. That's why we have this in common. Maybe that's why I took a job with you.
That's it.
But you came.
I did not know that you and Willie worked for Burly. This is breaking news to me, and I'm the family historian. Somehow this slipped by me. I never knew
I'm
this.
very appreciative of it because it showed
We
me.
all worked for Mac too at some point.
Yeah,
except for Jay.
It showed me in life that I need to do something else besides this.
Oh, that's
It
what I
made me
thought.
appreciate
Right, yeah.
future jobs.
I put you on the right track to get out of the construction business.
Yeah, it
Oh,
was
man.
it was rough. It was a rough job.
Roofing in Louisiana, especially in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I watch guys that do it, and I think, man, you talking about rough. You get up on top of that hot roof, because it's hotter there than any other place, and you got that stuff that heat stuff that holds.
But
the heat.
well, let me finish though the arrangement. Well, so you moved to Colorado, but you've always duck hunted with us because your dad did, and so all of a sudden I don't know how you made that arrangement with your wife, but you basically come here for what, 3 months?
3 months.
3 months every year. So, which I think there's a couple that my theory is that Miss Rose is like, I need a break.
She's happy to see me go. No, yeah. No, she wants to see me go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then she's happy,
Happy
when I
to
come
when
back.
you come home.
Yeah.
No, Rose is great, and she definitely. I've talked to her. She's definitely y'all keep Burly down there.
And the reason you're here now is because you're building a duck blind. We had a problem that developed last year in duck season, which was our best spot for the ducks turned out to be where we have the worst blind. And it's mainly, Phil had an idea that we were going to put a pit blind in the woods and hunt this spot. But the beavers tried to build a house there, and the mud got in there because this pit was under the ground. And it's real tight, and the older everyone is getting, I'm not going to mention any names, but it literally become impossible to sit in this blind and be comfortable.
32 inches is how wide that is.
Yeah, 32 inches.
That's
Just think about
Some
that.
of us are wider.
So when you buy a pair of blue jeans, do they still have the little waist size?
They do.
Well, we got 32.
32 been a while since we've been.
I'm probably the only person that's still wearing a 32.
Well, Dad is again now, so
32.
he's
Wait,
back down there.
The blind saved us for hunting a good hole because the ducks started moving up there to go down. It's probably about a 10-acre opening in the woods. Over there right now, if you drove up next to it and looked,
It's beautiful.
it's one of the most beautiful
Burly
places on
sent
planet
pictures
Earth.
today. Yeah, it's-
yeah, he did. I was going through those earlier. It looks beautiful.
That whole thing it's a
Smart weed.
smart weed,
Oh, it's beautiful.
pink smart weed. You got
Well,
pink and then you got the white, but this is all pink. So
That's the
it's
best.
really, really the best duck food you could have. Well, it's right there in the middle of this thing. So Burl's trying to lift us slightly a little higher than standing in the little bit of water. But as far as comfort and all, we have more comfortable blinds, but I wouldn't have done what they're now doing.
Well, here we go. See, this has been a 3-year
Burl's
argument.
doing it. Burl's at the head of it, so
But Phil, every
They're
time
set-
They had to
Big
wait until Dad
pole.
retired from the blind.
Phil's going to defend his blinds to the death, and we've figured that out. But the problem is when
it served us well.
the scout says we need to go hunt there, which I'm the scout.
Yeah.
And Phil's defending this blind, but when we're here in practical conversations in duck season, no one will pick to go to that spot because it's so uncomfortable.
But when they do, they kill more ducks.
There's been a lot of ducks killed there. I can
Very
speak
good.
to that myself.
It's
But
like
this
it's
one
like-
will be. This is more comfort. We are getting a little age now, so
The Duckman crew is getting older, and some of us wider than 32
Yep.
inches. So.
Well, and this blind didn't have a roof, it will now.
Oh, I remember.
I mean, if it's raining,
we'll be able to hunt it when the water gets a little higher. We've been going on the water, just had to be standing there in hip boots, but now it's be up about another 3 foot. So
about maybe 2 foot off the ground.
yeah,
So Burly had brought that to the operation, the ability to be able to construct things, which was helpful.
Yeah, that was his end. He
But
came to the
also-
Lord, and he can build duck blinds, which is very useful to what we do.
So when
is
Burly
correct.
was younger, he bore a striking resemblance when his hair was dark and his beard was dark to Randall Tex Cobb, the old kickboxer.
yep.
Remember that, Dad?
Yep.
Because we would always say, look, this Randall Tex Cobb. And so that opened the door for Burly to be a part of the early Duckmen video series, New Christian. And so some of our people are long time back. You remember Duckman 2, Duckman 3, all those early videos. So Burly's on there. And you always just kind of had that persona. It was kind of the Randall Tex Cobb. That's what you used to call you
Yep.
back in the day.
That's what he said.
Well, tell us how your dad,
Yeah, how did he wind up here?
Got you involved, with us, because I think that was really the bridge, I guess.
It was. Dad, he played football at the University of Oklahoma, and he was just a wild man.
And won a national championship, right? Or
2 national champions.
He was All-American.
Scholastic All-American.
Yeah.
He was there when they won 47 straight. They only lost 1 game his senior year to Notre Dame.
Who was that old coach at that time?
Wilkerson,
Bud Wilkerson.
Yeah.
a legend.
So Dad was just a wild, whiskey drinking, woman chasing, barroom brawling football player. He met my mom at a bar, knocked her up, married her. Here along comes my little sister, big sister, and then me. Mm-hmm. Well, he was still gambling and fighting and drinking and married to my mama, and she said it's either my way or the highway.
something's got to.
His dad was an alcoholic, but his mother, bless her heart, my grandma, she was going to church, and the only thing he knew to do was go to church with grandma.
Now, was this still in Oklahoma?
This was still in Oklahoma.
Okay.
So he sat down with the preacher, old Weldon Flanagan, shared the gospel with him, baptized him, and then he started taking my little sister to church. Well, Mama stayed home with me watching him because she didn't trust him because he's lying, sneaking around, gambling, drinking, She wanted to see if it was real. I would imagine about 3 months passed, and she got me and brought me, and she sat down with the same preacher, shared the gospel. She was baptized, and they never looked back. 3 days a week, they're in the church. That's all I remember.
Yeah.
And when Phil showed up in about 76, maybe, with y'all, little ragtag family.
Yeah, with his conversion.
So what got him to West Monroe? I don't know that I've ever asked you that.
Well,
just business or
he was selling tire. He's a salesman. He run his mouth. He can sell anything.
he's great
He'll
at it.
look you right in the eye and sell you a used car.
Oh yeah.
It's not an
Big
easy
boy.
thing to do. So he wanted to start the Furniture Mart, Alton Howard.
Okay.
He got him to come and kind of join up with him, and Gibson's was next door, and Piggly Wiggly, and then Gibson's.
We had a lot of business owners in our church.
turned into Howard
Yeah.
Brothers, and then of course Howard Brothers, turned into Walmart eventually. But so we came, and I was in the 2nd grade, and when I was about in the 10th grade, you showed up at the church building where me and my family was sitting, and of course we didn't know what to do with you. He was the first alcoholic we had come up and admit it.
Yeah.
Right out of the world.
But you found my daddy, Big Boy, and Tommy Powell, and a few others who came out of the same lifestyle, and you saw that it could be done. So the ironic part is my dad mentored Phil,
Yep.
but I wouldn't listen to my dad because, I didn't believe what he said,
Yeah.
I thought he was the dumbest man on the planet. And then Phil mentored me, 10 years later when I was ready to come to the Lord. I remember when I got out of college playing football at OU, we went up to Moss Lake. We got in a big cypress tree blind, and we spent a weekend up there. And I don't remember you preaching to me, but I do remember you loving me. And so he earned that right to speak into my life 10 years later when I was ready.
Yep.
And, of course, Dad, he hunted and fished. Y'all did a lot of stuff together, a lot of tales.
So we are super excited to tell you about a new podcast that's begun. It's called ReFocus with Jim Daly, and Jim is the president of Focus on the Family, a great group that's been around for over 40 years. Good friends of ours, just has done great work in marriage, families, children, how to raise your kids. Lisa and I have partnered with him for a couple of our books as well. This new podcast, ReFocus with Jim Daly, is going to deal with culture, politics, but also sharing your faith in these days that are kind of crazy and wild. Dad, I think you and I are going to appear on a future podcast with Jim, so I'm excited about that, to talk about the movie and other things. So we want you to check them out, the ReFocus Podcast with Jim Daly. You can get it on Spotify or Apple or anywhere else that you listen to your podcast. So check them out, ReFocus with Jim Daly.
Oh, yeah. I think the most memorable one was when he was trying to get in down here, and he brought the ham, a big ham, because he knew he couldn't just show up and ask to go duck hunting.
No one comes empty-handed.
Yeah.
Just think about it. 5 o'clock in the morning, knock on the door. I opened the door, and his daddy was standing there.
With a ham under his arm.
Well, he came early. I said, what's you got here? He said, I want to duck hunt with y'all, and I got a whole ham with me. I said, well, come on in. Well, the next morning at 5 o'clock.
He's a salesman.
Next morning at 5 o'clock, I opened the door. He was standing there with another ham. I said, let's go duck hunting. Well, 3 days later, knock on the door. He's standing there with another ham. I said, big boy, let me explain something to you. I like the ham, but get off the ham. Bring something else.
We need some variety.
Well,
I done got burnt out on that ham. I said, hey, you can go. You don't have to have a ham
His
with
mind was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
it's so funny now because Burly is in charge. He got that from his dad.
Snacks
Even to this day.
He still does it.
He always has a bucket of snacks and foods and
Honey
berries.
buns.
But you have a lot better selection.
Yeah.
I mix it up a little bit. I learned
Burl
on
going down the
ham trick.
line, if somebody forgot their coffee or something, or some grub, Burl was your man. He had canned sardines, little snacks, little paper things, Twinkies. He had all kind of stuff, always. Among duck hunters, that's an important guy.
Well, yeah, because you get out there, you're hungry,
Can
and,
be.
you need something. So Burly, your dad, I don't know, I think I've told you this story before, but he had a huge impact on me because when Jason and I went to preaching school, and then I wound up working for the church, and I'd never really done anything else before, and so he'd come up and spend time with me and just visit and talk a lot about it. And then he knew we didn't have any money, and especially we were just starting out in ministry. And now he was doing pretty well in the insurance business by this point. And he set me and Lisa up with a life insurance policy, and he paid it for us.
Well, through all of that,
he offered, not only did he set it up, but he said, and I'm going to pay for it for you as my gift to you for making a decision to go into
Burl
full-time
went
ministry.
through the stage of carpentry and roofing and all that, but he also went to nursing school. And I know it sounds funny because people be looking here, but this man right here is a registered nurse. And I've long said, if you're in a coma, they put you to sleep, and for operation, and they open their eyes with Burl standing over you like that. It's that you think you're going to hell. See, he had that look as a registered nurse standing over the patient, but they thinking,
What do they say? Because you're a travel nurse now. What do they say when you come in? Do you get a few strange looks from?
I've been sent out of the room before just on sight. But once they know me, they love me.
Yeah.
But I think I look more like maybe the Archangel Michael than Lucifer himself.
That's right.
Well, we just were talking about that the last couple podcasts. That is amazing that you can find a job looking the way you do in that
Well,
field.
I could say the same.
Looking around the table. That's right. Where do you think the look came
Well,
from?
most people listen to this podcast because I have a face for radio.
Which is kind of funny. No, yeah, Burly, again, he continues on that. So I want to talk about your conversion itself. Before we do that, let's take a break. So what I remember, Burly, was when you mentioned that 10-year period, you went off, you kind of were like me, you spent some time in the world trying to figure things out, and that, of course, becomes a dead end. And when you came back, I guess you were just out of college or just around college age, but you showed up with this little guy that he's still around. He's called Lil B. Mm-hmm. He's a miniature person. He's very small. And his name is Brad. We used to call him Lil B. And it was Burly and Little B.
Whatever happened to him?
He's around.
He's around.
He's up there. He's in that Duck Commander Bible, one of his stories.
His story. So the first time I really met, we kind of were around each other, but then you were gone for a while. So when you came back, my first memory of you was being with Lil B, and so y'all pulled up together. And I guess somebody sent you out to talk to Dad or something. I don't know, but tell a little bit of the story about how you wound up with, you were kind of the original Mutt and Jeff, because you're a big man. He's a little bitty guy, but y'all ran together.
Well, before you do, I met Brad at Westboro High School. And the only reason I remember him is because he was in trouble all the time.
Yeah.
And I remember the night that you brought him down to Phil's house, and I was there. When he walked in the door, because at this stage of my life, I didn't realize that anyone really, God can reach anyone. I mean, we're in this story in Luke 8 with Jesus repairing a guy who's got a legion of demons in him. But I remember looking at my dad saying, this guy, he ain't going to do it. Let me just tell you.
He's too.
Because he was in so much trouble and just such a foul mouth and just off the charts at high school. He was just, everyone knew who he was.
Well, he's kind of had the little man syndrome because he was a little guy, so he kind of made up for it by having a rooster attitude. Like, that's kind of.
So I didn't know if you knew that, but I was going to remind you that
I knew it.
That I had to repent after, because then you can tell the story. But
Yeah. Well, you have worldly friends.
Yep.
And it's because they got something that you want. Well, he had good weed, so he was my buddy, So we would go to the bars together, and I would tell everybody, I said, that little dude there, he's my bodyguard. Don't mess with me, or he's going to,
yeah. Because you're like,
mess you
what,
up.
6'5", 240, or
You had been playing college football at OU. You're a big guy.
and you could put him
He's
in your
about
pocket.
5'4",
You could put him in one of your pockets.
But he would go over and start stuff, and then he'd point at me, and he would say, that's my bodyguard, And he's like, okay.
Yeah.
So, I promised Mom that I'd go to church, and you got to keep your promises to Mom.
Yeah.
So I show up at Whites Ferry Road, and I'm in the parking lot, and there's Phil. He says, what about it, Dane? We've been duck hunting before, and he was running with my dad. And he said, let me ask you a question. Do you love God? And I said, well, to myself, what kind of question is that?
Yeah.
And I said, well, sure I do. So he broke his Bible out, and he read 1 John 5:3. This is love for God, to obey his commands. And his commands are not burdensome. He said, what about it? You love God? And I said, not according to that, I don't. I said, don't get me confused with a hypocrite. I'm only here because I promised Mama.
Yeah.
I said, I'm not even pretending to obey his commands, but I love God. He said, no, you don't. You don't love him. Actually, you hate him. And if you hate him, you're his enemy. Well, I was fixing to fight in the parking lot, but I knew Mom wouldn't like that, so...
Yeah, so it made you mad.
He probably would win, so
yeah,
it made me mad. But I believe the Bible, and it made me think. So I started showing up, started coming out to the house church, brought Brad with me. Of course, we smoking pot on the way, and on the way back, but I had been on a decade of debauchery, about a 10-year run, and I was ready. I mean, I was nowhere to go but up. It always takes a train wreck to get your attention, and I was there. So,
the little guy, what was his name?
Little B.
Brad.
Yeah, Brad. He said finally, after they left one night, he said, instead of breaking out the weed and smoking it, they threw it out
the window.
Threw it out the window, kept going.
Yep.
That was the sign.
Yep. And both y'all came around the same time, right? I mean, you kind of both made that decision.
we did. I had a 12-year-old conversion, kind of like you did. I was baptized. It didn't take.
Yeah, me too.
And when I was 29, I kept hearing people hear the gospel and coming to them, and life's changing. And I hung around for 3 months before I could finally figure out that didn't take, and I didn't have God's Spirit because I had no power. I couldn't quit smoking pot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so one day we were coming back from Alexandria, and we were doing a little house church down there, and I was a prideful man, like most people, and I said, Phil, I got a good friend of mine. He was 12 when he was baptized, and now he's trying to get it on, and just don't know if that baptism took or not. No power, no Holy Spirit. I said, what do you think about that guy? And of course, I was talking about myself, but I couldn't even
Yeah,
say
you
it.
were disguising it. Yeah.
Phil said, Burly, you son, you need to be baptized. You know, I said, well, you know, there's a pothole right up there. Let's stop. He said, calm down.
Yeah.
Come down to the house tomorrow. We'll look at the verses, write them down. You'll have no doubt. Bring you a change of clothes. And that was April 27th, 1989.
Wow.
89. Good night.
And so
99, 2009.
Don't start doing the math. It's gonna make it. I had just
33.
graduated high school 2 years.
33.
yeah, I had just got married, started working for the church. So Burly, you were a part of that era then when we were going down to Ellick.
Right.
And the riders and all that. So you mentioned them earlier.
Exactly.
It's really interesting because it was a group of people, a bunch of them kind of came to Christ at the same time, but they were all about an hour and a half from here. And so it was where they all lived. And but they would come up on Sundays and meet with us, and then we would drive down there. But then they were bringing all their friends into a house church type setting.
Right.
And so we were leading a lot of people to Christ.
There's still quite a few.
Oh, yeah, they're all great. Most
one
of
was
them
here the other day. Was it? What was it?
Kurt was here the other day.
Yeah, Kurt. Yeah.
So that was an interesting and fun era because, you know, everything was, we were just hitting people. I mean, what a great time to come into Christ.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when all that was going on.
We had our own recovery group. We didn't need to celebrate recovery because we had our own little
That's right.
recovery group.
That's right. Which ultimately, by the way, and anybody in CR will tell you this, if Jesus isn't in charge of your recovery, then you're in the wrong business because he has to be the one.
You got to have people
Yeah.
by your side.
Exactly.
But it's even the principle when Jesus, you know, we're studying Luke when his mother and brothers had showed up because they thought he had gone crazy because he's forgiven people of their sins and he was giving you that picture of what the family of God is. And it is in homes. You know, I tell people all the time, you rarely find, you know, Jesus in the church building. It's usually through those relationships and the conversations that happen. And just like, you know, my dad was telling you, come down to the house.
Right.
And it evolves because it's way harder to live for Jesus on the way to the house and on the way to the church building and out in the world. And even in that business we had, you know, I think I was going to the school.
In 89. We went to 88 to 90.
Right in that time, which maybe that roofing drove me to the school of
Preaching.
the seminary. Yeah, because, boy, yeah.
Crawfishing and roofing will send you
But
right
I
to-
just remember seeing you as a young brother, and even though you were older than me, I was older in the faith.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just remember that day when everything went wrong. You left to try to get a job somewhere, you know, another roofing job, and all your workers, which I was the destruction crew, so it wasn't my fault, but they had we had roofed the house like backwards. And it's like all the shingles were upside down.
Hang on, let's take a break.
And so when Burly
Out of all the things you want to do backwards, roofing is not one of them.
no.
You're trying to keep water out of the house.
Put the shingles on backwards. And Burly showed up, and I was the only one there for some reason. And it was a fit of rage.
Me with a shovel.
I don't know if you remember that, but you were almost. It reminds me of this superhuman strength of some kind of demon coming up, because he was taking 2 bundles at a time, which those things are
Heavy, yeah.
and he was just throwing them across and just ripping it off. Like, I was like, this guy is so mad, and he's such a big fella that I'm not. This may be the old man returning. I don't know if you remember that. It was the only time, and you were using 4-letter word. I mean, you were
Kind of, sort of. I don't.
Apoplectic.
you just lost it.
That was the old me trying to come back.
Well,
That's
it
right.
was, but it led to a good conversation. I mean, you know, because at the end of the day, it wasn't because I said anything. You just kind of stopped. I don't know if you remember the details, and you're like, you know, I'm not going to be this way, and but because it was clearly I mean, I don't know what that cost you, but it pretty much you lost money on that because we had to go buy the.
Oh, you gotta do the whole
Not
thing
only
over
did
again.
we do it upside down, it ruined everything, and then he had to do it again,
Right.
basically.
So I don't know, Burly, if it's because of your own conversion experiences or what, but one thing I've noticed about you, just in our kingdom work together, because even though you moved away, you've always still been a part of us, as we described earlier. You've always had an ability to talk to anybody. We had a guy in here a couple of days ago that was around, and he told us his story. And you were one who you saw him, you noticed, and you impacted. And that's happened a lot through the years. So you think that's just something, is it because of your own past and being delivered, or what gives you that? Because a lot of people don't look at people as an opportunity to then help them and show them Jesus. A lot of people avoid people or whatever, but you have that ability, and you always have. And even some of the tougher cases, some of the ones that are a little bit, they're struggling with some, either demons or, their own sinfulness, but you've always had an ability to bring calm into that situation. I've noticed just in all of us have a role here, but that seems to be one of yours. Where do you think that comes from? I mean, why do you have that?
Well, if you've been down that road, all things happen for the good for those who love the Lord. I heard Mac Owen say one time, every hurt, every habit, every hang up that you overcome needs to become a ministry to help others. And you do that with families with children with special needs, and you and Lisa with marriage and pro-life and all that. And so, if you've been down that road, you can have some empathy, some sympathy for those people. But, I've seen him do it over and over and over. So,
yeah.
Well, all of us need to remember what Paul said to the Corinthians. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, which we all are, we all talk about our journeys for our faith from years past. He's a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, and this is the text, the words, not counting men's sins against them.
Mm-hmm.
He has committed us the message of reconciliation. So although we all struggle, we all make mistakes, the great news is God doesn't count our sins against us. We just get up and keep plowing forward.
that's right.
Yeah, I've thought about before, though. I think your skills of being a nurse, I think you get that. And I've thought about this, I've never shared this with you before, but, we always break down the qualities that the Spirit gives us. The fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience. Well, gentleness is in there.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at a guy like Burly, I mean, I make a joke all the time that one of the benefits of looking like I do is that people don't try to mug me.
Same here.
Oh, you would be the last person on the planet. I mean, number one, because they don't think you have anything, just looking like you do.
Right.
But two, I mean, who's going to take you
He's a
on?
big guy.
He's a big guy, and lately I've not seen him without a pistol on his body.
Yeah, well, he doesn't need the pistol.
So I
trust
feel
me.
better about running with him because if a shootout ensues, I always got old barrel to lean back on.
But my point is, it shows you, it's almost that shows you God convicts people in that, I was so wrong about Brad because I had met him from a distance.
Yep.
And I was like, no way. And I'm sure people said the same thing about Paul. And then when you see your life,
or
Dad,
him.
yeah.
but even in Burly's case, I mean, his talent is gentleness.
Yeah.
And it shows you that it's a fruit of the Spirit, which is, it's borderline. You're thinking it's almost a miraculous gift of the Holy Spirit,
Right.
Yeah.
Which it's not. So,
Gentleness and patience, I would add in there. I mean, that's the way that you handle yourself early is that. And that's what I see in people. And, people, working with people is a messy business, because people are a mess. And I think people that have been delivered as a mess do turn that into that message you're talking about. And so I think that served you well, and I know it has in the medical side, because that's another case where people are afraid. They're scared. They're sick. Something's wrong with them. And, again, a lot of times a doctor, somebody will come in and just, this, that, and the other, and they're harsh with these people.
They are.
But you have a way of being gentle. And I think it surprises them, because they look and they're like, oh, no, this guy.
Yeah, but
that's
makes
why
sense.
they love you once they get to know you.
It makes sense when it's the fruit of the Spirit.
Absolutely.
So it's like, I remember having that
Where Burly works, he's the one they call in when they have an irate person in there.
He has a calming
They're
effect.
tearing up the hospital room.
Right.
They call Burly in, and football takes over them, and it's.
Well, I mean, physically you can handle it, which is another reason why men nurses are great, right? Because that's a physical job. You're moving people around.
Have you ever had a scuffle with them?
Yeah, but more times than not, I'm able to spiritually take care of them than physically, but sometimes you have to. I remember a couple verses, when you shared the gospel with me. One of the first ones was Romans 1:16, where we get the name of this podcast, I'm Not Ashamed of the Gospel. And when we got done with the Bible study, the very last one you shared with me was in Matthew 10:32. Whoever acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before men, I will disown him before my Father in heaven. So I knew that I had to go public with Jesus from the get-go. I couldn't be ashamed of the gospel. And that's one reason I'm so ready to talk to people. But to me, to disown him would mean just keep my mouth shut and don't say nothing. Yeah. My buddies, like Brad came over and he said, I got some good weed. You want to smoke it? And I could have said, no, I think this stuff's bad for you. I'm just going to quit. And I said, I got something better than that. He said, what you got?
Yeah, better than weed.
Let's take a look. Take a look.
I said, I got Jesus. He's like, he was putting it up. He's like, and that's how I acknowledged Jesus. If I'd just shut up and said, no, I think I'm just going to quit, I would have disowned Jesus. And
I like that. That's good. And that goes back to the idea of he's not ashamed of us either. So we're out of time. Burly, it's always a pleasure to have you around. It's great to finally get you on the podcast. We got our overtime segment, so I want to have a little more discussion. One of the things I didn't get to bring up, I want to ask you about Blue, Dad's dog, because we've had many debates on this podcast in the early days, especially about Blue versus other dogs. And so you've got some updates on that. So I want to talk about that, as well as just this idea of what we do together as kingdom workers. So again, thanks for being on. If you want to follow us over for overtime, it's blazetv.com/unashamed for more with Burly Jennings.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.